On my first day back in the family home, I walked in as the rightful heir and walked out disowned and homeless. My parents kicked me out, handing the entire house to my sister-in-law, who had never lifted a finger to maintain it. They expected me to beg to break down in tears, but I just smiled, leaned in close, and whispered, "Did you forget?" Their blank stares told me they had no idea what was coming. 1 month later, after I handed the judge a single envelope in court, none of them had a home to return to. My name is Amaya Ruiz, and at 37 years old, I stood in the grand foyer of our historic house in New Orleans facing the ultimate betrayal. This wasn't just any property. It was the family legacy my grandmother had built from nothing, a place I had poured my life into saving. But from the moment I was born, I was the overlooked one, the daughter who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. My parents always favored my brother, showering him with praise while I handled the real responsibilities. Things got worse when he married his wife 5 years ago. She came from money, dazzling them with expensive gifts and promises of security. Suddenly, I was the outsider, the one they plotted to remove, so she could claim it all. They gathered in the living room that morning not for a family talk, but to execute their plan. My father read from a prepared script, his voice shaky, declaring the house hers. My mother nodded along, her eyes cold. My sister-in-law stepped forward with that smug grin, already holding the new deed. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I placed my key on the table, straightened my back, and walked out. But as the door closed behind me, I knew the real battle had just begun. If you're hooked on this family drama, hit that like button, subscribe for more revenge stories like this, and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss the twists that make these tales unforgettable. From a young age, I had gotten used to being looked down on. My father, Ernest Ruiz, was the kind of man who avoided conflict at all costs, always folding under pressure, especially from my mother, Gloria Ruiz. She had a way of steering every decision to benefit my brother Spencer Ruiz, who was 3 years my junior. It started small, but it built up over the years, shaping how I saw myself in the family. Take birthdays, for example. Spencer's were always events. Gloria would plan elaborate gatherings in our historic house in New Orleans, inviting his friends from school, ordering a custom cake shaped like his favorite superhero, and stacking gifts that filled the living room table. Ernest would beam, clapping Spencer on the back and saying how proud he was of his boy growing up so strong. My birthdays. They were quiet affairs, maybe a store-bought cake if Gloria remembered, and a single gift like a book or clothes I needed anyway. If I complained, she would sigh and tell Ernest I was being ungrateful, that girls didn't need all the fuss. He would nod along, too weak to argue, leaving me feeling like an afterthought. School was another battleground. Spencer brought home C's and B's, and they treated him like a genius. Gloria would sit with him after dinner, helping with homework even when he barely tried, praising every small effort. Ernest would say things like, "That's my boy, you'll go far." But when I came home with straight A's, pushing myself to the top of the class, it was met with indifference. "Good job, Amaya, but don't get too full of yourself," Gloria would say, twisting it into a warning. She made sure Ernest saw me as the overachiever who didn't need help, the one who could handle everything alone. If I asked for tutoring money or supplies, she would whisper to him about how it was a waste, that Spencer needed resources more because he was sensitive. Ernest bought into it every time, his spine turning to jelly under her influence. Gloria was the master manipulator in our house. She knew how to play on Ernest's fears, fear of arguments, fear of being seen as a bad father. She would corner him in the kitchen after I went to bed, saying things like, "Amaya's so independent, she doesn't need us like Spencer does. He's the one who'll carry on the family name." It made me the outsider, the gonnong they tolerated but never celebrated. I learned early to keep my head down, to prove my worth through actions rather than words. By high school, I was handling chores around the house that Spencer never touched, mowing the lawn in the humid Louisiana heat, fixing leaky faucets in the old plumbing, even painting the fading shutters on our century-old home. Gloria would watch and comment to Ernest, "See, she's fine on her own. Let's focus on Spencer's soccer practice." He would agree, avoiding my eyes. The real turning point came when I turned 18. I had worked tirelessly for a full scholarship to Louisiana State University, majoring in business administration. It was my ticket out, a chance to build something for myself. But that same year, the house our family's pride passed down from my grandmother hit hard times. A major hurricane had damaged the roof, flooding the attic and weakening the structure. The bank sent notices about unpaid property taxes piling up, threatening foreclosure. Gloria panicked but did nothing, blaming the economy. Ernest buried his head, saying we'd figure it out. Spencer, still in high school, shrugged it off like it wasn't his problem. I couldn't let it go. That house wasn't just walls and floors. It was our history, with its creaking wooden stairs, antique chandeliers, and the garden where Grandma had planted roses that still bloomed every spring. So I gave up the scholarship. Instead of heading to campus, I took a full-time job at a local property management office, answering phones and filing papers for minimum wage. Every dollar I earned went into saving the place. First, I paid off the back taxes, $2,000 scraped together from overtime shifts. Then I hired a roofer to replace the damaged shingles, costing another $3,000, which I covered by skipping meals and selling some old jewelry Grandma had given me. I coordinated with contractors to seal the foundation cracks, preventing further water damage, and that ran another $1,500. Gloria watched me juggle it all, but instead of helping, she told Ernest I was being dramatic, that the house wasn't worth the hassle. He echoed her, too timid to step in. For 2 years, I poured everything into those repairs. I learned to negotiate with suppliers for cheaper materials, spent weekends sanding floors and repainting rooms to preserve the historic charm. The bank backed off once the debts were cleared, and the house stood strong again. But did I get any credit? Num B. Gloria spun it to Ernest as me meddling, saying I was trying to control the family assets. Spencer barely noticed, too busy with his carefree life. Ernest patted me on the shoulder once, mumbling something about good work, but that was it. They let me carry the weight, treating my sacrifices as obligations, while Spencer's minor achievements got parades. Looking back, it set the pattern for how they'd betray me later. Gloria's manipulations made Ernest see Spencer and eventually his wife as the golden ones, while I was the disposable helper. I thought saving the house would earn me a place in the family, but it only made me easier to push aside when someone shinier came along. The resentment built quietly, but I kept going, believing loyalty would pay off. How wrong I was. When Spencer got married, everything shifted for the worse. It was 5 years ago, and he brought home Journée Ruiz, a woman who seemed to have it all: her own successful online boutique business that brought in steady cash, flashy cars, and a knack for charming people with her wallet. At first, I thought it might bring some balance to the family, but Journée quickly saw an opportunity to insert herself as the new favorite. She started small, showing up with expensive gifts for Gloria and Ernest, a luxury handbag for my mother on her birthday, tickets to a jazz festival for my father, things I could never afford on my salary from the property office. They ate it up, their eyes lighting up in ways they never did for me. Journey's money became her weapon. She paid for family vacations to the Gulf Coast, covering hotel stays and meals, making sure Gloria and Ernest felt pampered. In return, they started treating her like the daughter they always wanted. Spencer, being as passive as Ernest, just went along with it, smiling while Journey took center stage. Suddenly, conversations at dinner revolved around her business ideas or her latest deals, and my input got brushed aside. If I suggested ways to maintain the house, like updating the electrical wiring to prevent fires in our old structure, Gloria would wave it off, saying Journée had better connections for that sort of thing. Ernest would mumble agreement, avoiding my gaze, too afraid to rock the boat. The contempt toward me intensified almost immediately. Journey would make snide comments about how I was still single and tied to the house, implying I was holding everyone back. Gloria latched onto that, telling Ernest I was too focused on the past, that the family needed fresh energy. They began excluding me from decisions about the property. When the garden needed tending after a storm uprooted some trees, Journey hired her own landscaper and billed it as a gift. But she chose plants that didn't fit the historic style, turning the rose beds Grandma loved into something modern and generic. I protested, but Gloria shut me down, saying, "Let Journey handle it, she's investing in our future." Ernest nodded, his weakness showing as he let the manipulation slide. It didn't take long for Journey to push further. She convinced them the house was too big for all of us, that Spencer and she could turn it into something profitable, maybe a bed and breakfast to leverage its historic status in New Orleans. Gloria, always the strategist, saw dollar signs and started plotting with her. They held private meetings in the study, whispering about how to restructure ownership. Ernest, under their influence, went from passive to active participant. He confided in Spencer about feeling burdened by the maintenance costs I had always covered, and Journey fueled it by promising to take over if I was out of the picture. They framed me as the problem, the one clinging to the place out of sentiment, ignoring how I'd saved it from foreclosure. The plan to kick me out crystallized over months. Journey bankrolled home appraisals hinting at selling parts of the land for development. Gloria twisted Ernest's arm, saying it was for the family's security in their old age, that Journey would ensure they were taken care of. He caved, too spineless to defend me. Spencer stayed silent, happy to let his wife lead. They timed it for when I was at my most vulnerable after a long day at work, calling that family council to announce the transfer. It led straight to the moment I walked out, key in hand, but not before that whisper. In the days after, holed up in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, I couldn't shake the betrayal. That's when I remembered Grandma's old safe in the attic, something she'd mentioned years ago, pressing a key into my hand before she passed. "For when they forget who built this," she'd said. I sneaked back one night when they were out using a hidden entrance I knew from childhood repairs. The safe was dusty, tucked behind old trunks, but the combination was my birth date, a detail that hit hard amid the favoritism. Inside was the D. Chuk, notarized and ironclad. Grandma had left me 70% ownership in a protective trust hidden from the family to prevent fights. But there was a clause. It activated only if I was wrongfully removed from the home and replaced by someone without proven contribution. Someone like Journey, who'd never paid a dime for upkeep. The trust required proof of mismanagement or manipulation within a set period, giving me time to build a case. It was Grandma's safety net, knowing Ernest's weakness and Gloria's schemes. She had foreseen this, burying it deep in legal language that their lawyer Dwight Craig had overlooked in his rush to please them. With the document in hand, I felt a spark of power. The clause outlined steps. Document the manipulation, show the house's decline under new control, and file in probate court. It wasn't revenge yet, but a path to justice. I pocketed the key and slipped out, heart racing. The real work was about to start. On the second week, after being fired, I called Camden Wells. He was my cousin on Grandma's side, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but he was the only one who knew about her old secrets from family gatherings long ago. I dialed his number from the motel room, explaining the situation in hushed tones, the sudden eviction, the transfer to Journey, the D. Chuk I'd found. Camden didn't hesitate. He agreed to help gather evidence, saying he'd dig into public records and talk to old contacts who knew the house's history. As an accountant in Baton Rouge, he had access to financial trails that could prove mismanagement. We set up a plan. He'd monitor property filings remotely, and I'd keep tabs on what was happening inside through neighbors I trusted. The first month under Journey's control was a nightmare I watched unfold from afar. She wasted no time treating the house like her personal piggy bank. Camden tipped me off to the first red flag A listing on an online auction site for several antique pieces from the living room. Journey had sold off the mahogany dining table that Grandma brought from Spain in the 1920s, claiming it was outdated and fetching a quick $2,000. Then came the chairs, a set of 6 with hand-carved details gone for another $1,500 to some collector in Texas. She justified it to Gloria and Ernest as decluttering for a fresh start, but Camden traced the payment straight to her personal account. It wasn't preservation, it was liquidation for her gain. Next, Journey dove into the taxes. The house, being historic, qualified for certain exemptions in Louisiana, but she filed amended forms to claim extra deductions she wasn't entitled to. Camden pulled the records from the parish assessor's office. She listed fake renovation costs, inflating them by thousands, to reduce the property tax bill. This let her pocket the savings, but it risked audits that could slap liens on the place. Ernest knew about it. He signed off on the forms as co-owner, too intimidated by her business talk to question. Gloria encouraged it, seeing it as smart money management. Meanwhile, the house suffered. Unpaid minor bills started piling up like the insurance premium because Journey redirected funds to her boutique's inventory. The parties were the worst part. Journey threw lavish gatherings almost weekly, inviting her circle of entrepreneurs and socialites to network in what she called her new headquarters. I'd get photos from a neighbor who felt bad for me, dozens of people trampling the original oak floors, spilling drinks that stained the rugs, and even chipping the plaster walls during rowdy games. One night, they set up a dance floor in the parlor, and the vibrations cracked an antique mirror that's been there since the Civil War era. Camden documented it all, getting affidavits from contractors who'd been called in for quick fixes, billing hundreds each time to her account. She didn't care about the damage. It was all about showing off the space as hers, turning our family legacy into a party venue. Then there was Dwight Craig, the family lawyer they'd hired years ago to handle Grandma's estate. Camden's digging revealed he was in on the scheme. Journey had him set up a separate fund for house repairs, but instead of using it for upkeep, he siphoned off portions. We found bank statements showing transfers: $500 here for legal fees, $1,000 there for consulting, all landing in an account linked to his firm. But Camden traced it further. Some went straight to Journey's business as investments. Dwight had drafted the eviction papers too, backdating them to make it look like I'd agreed to leave voluntarily. It was embezzlement, plain and simple, violating trust laws in Louisiana. Ernest and Gloria turned a blind eye, convinced by Journey that it was efficient handling. Camden compiled it into a file. Screenshots of auctions tax forms with discrepancies, photos of party damage, and wire transfer records. He even got a statement from the insurance company noting lapsed payments, risking coverage on the whole property. It was enough to show the clause in action: wrongful removal leading to deliberate harm. Journey wasn't just occupying the house, she was dismantling it piece by piece for profit. Gloria orchestrated the excuses, keeping Ernest in line with talks of security. Spencer stayed out of it, letting his wife run the show. As the evidence stacked up, I felt the tide turning. The month dragged, but each discovery strengthened my case. Dwight's involvement was the clincher, his name on every shady document. Camden warned me to keep quiet until we had everything airtight, avoiding any confrontation that could tip them off. I spent nights in that motel reviewing it, all the anger fueling my resolve. The house wasn't just bricks. It was my history, and they were erasing it. In the second week, Camden sent me an encrypted file with old financial records he'd pulled from public archives. It detailed a scam Journey had run 15 years ago, back when she was building her boutique empire. She'd posed as an investment advisor, convincing people to pour money into phony real estate deals promising high returns. One victim stood out: Otis Love, my former mentor from the property management job. He'd been a kind man in his 50s, teaching me the ropes of appraisals and contracts when I started out. Journey lured him with talk of flipping historic homes in New Orleans, getting him to invest his savings, $30,000, into a shell company she controlled. The deal collapsed, the funds vanished, and Otis lost everything, including his own condo, to creditors. He ended up in a low-income senior apartment, his health declining from the stress. Camden included court filings where Otis had sued but settled for pennies, intimidated by Journey's lawyers into silence. The revelation hit like a gut punch. Otis had been more than a boss. He'd encouraged me when my family didn't even writing recommendation letters for jobs I never took because of the house. Journey's fraud had ruined him, and now she was doing the same to our family legacy. I confronted Gloria that afternoon, showing up unannounced at the house under the pretense of picking up forgotten mail. She answered the door, her face tightening when she saw me. We sat in the kitchen, the same spot where she'd dismissed my efforts for years. I laid out the evidence on Otis, demanding to know if she was aware of Journey's past before pushing me out. Gloria denied it at first, crossing her arms and saying it was old news, nothing to do with the family. But as I pressed, showing printouts, Camden had prepared, her facade cracked. She admitted knowing bits Journey had confided during early family dinners, framing it as a business mishap. Gloria had used it to her advantage, convincing Ernest that Journey's sharpness made her ideal to manage the house. She knows how to make money work, Gloria said, her voice defensive. I pushed harder, accusing her of masterminding the eviction to hand everything over. She snapped, then revealing how she'd orchestrated it all. For months, she'd fed Ernest doubts about my loyalty, saying I was hoarding control of the property. Journey supplied the ammo, fake stories about me bad-mouthing the family, while Gloria twisted them into reasons to cut me loose. "You were always the problem," she hissed, clinging like you owned the place. Ernest had resisted at first, but Gloria wore him down with talks of security and old age, promising Journey would provide if I was gone. The confrontation escalated when Ernest walked in midway. He looked frail, caught between us, but Gloria turned on him, demanding he back her up. I showed him the Otis files too, asking if this was the kind of person he wanted running our home. He stammered, admitting he'd signed the transfer papers under pressure, but defended it as protecting the family. Journey had cornered him privately, threatening to pull her financial support covering their medical bills, funding trips if he didn't agree to the plan. Gloria had sealed it, guilting him about Spencer's happiness. The stress showed on his face. His hands shook as he tried to mediate. That night, Ernest's condition worsened. The constant pushing from Journey, calls demanding updates on the house, insisting on more changes, piled on. Gloria later told me at the hospital that he'd collapsed after a heated argument with Journey over the phone, where she accused him of second-guessing the eviction. His blood pressure spiked, leading to a hypertensive crisis. Doctors admitted him for observation, hooking him to monitors in the ER. I sat by his bed watching him rest, the beeps echoing my anger. Gloria hovered, blaming me for stirring trouble, but I saw the cracks her manipulation had pushed him to the brink. Spencer arrived late, avoiding my eyes, while Journey texted excuses about work. Camden kept working in the background, adding Otis's affidavit to our dossier. Otis, now in his 70s, agreed to a statement after I visited his apartment, recounting how Journey's scheme had forced him into bankruptcy. It tied directly to the clause, evidence of character unfit for stewardship. The hospital visit gave me leverage, too. Ernest's breakdown stemmed from the pressure Journey applied post-eviction. I documented his medical notes showing the timeline. Gloria tried to downplay it, but her earlier admissions during our fight were recorded on my phone, hidden in my pocket. As the week ended, the case felt solid. Otis's story wasn't just past dirt. It proved Journey's pattern of exploitation mirroring what she was doing now. Ernest's hospitalization highlighted the toll of Gloria's schemes. I left the ward resolved, knowing the confrontation had exposed their web. The evidence mounted, ready for the next step. At the hospital, Ernest looked smaller than ever, hooked to monitors with tubes running from his arm. Gloria had stepped out for coffee, leaving us alone for the first time since the eviction. I sat by the bed, watching his chest rise and fall. He opened his eyes, saw me, and turned his head away at first. Then, in a cracked voice, he started talking. "Amaya," he whispered. There's something I need to tell you before anything else happens. He paused, gripping the sheet. Years ago, right after you were born, Gloria came to me with a story. She said your mother had been unfaithful during a rough patch in our marriage. She claimed to have proof letters, a diary entry. She convinced me you might not be mine. His eyes filled. I was weak. I believed her because it was easier than fighting. It gave me an excuse to pull away to focus on Spencer without guilt. Journey fed the same lie later, saying blood mattered, that Spencer and she were the real future. I let it shape everything. I stared at him, the words landing like blows. All those years of distance, the favoritism, the cold shoulder, it stemmed from a lie they'd chosen to believe. Ernest continued, voice shaking. I never got a test. I was too scared of the truth, too scared of Gloria. Journey used it, whispering that keeping you around risked the inheritance going to an outsider. That's why I signed the papers. I thought I was protecting the family line. Camden's latest package arrived that afternoon while I was still processing. He sent a thick envelope to the hospital waiting area, bank records showing Dwight Craig's embezzlement in detail, with transfers totaling over $12,000 from the repair fund to Journey's accounts disguised as vendor payments. There were also emails between Dwight and Journey discussing how to backdate documents for the eviction, plus the full Otis Love file, signed agreements from 15 years ago, proof of the fake investment scheme, and Otis's sworn statement confirming Journey had knowingly defrauded him. Camden had even pulled Dwight's Bar Association complaints past clients accusing similar misconduct. It was leverage that could bury them both. I took it all back to Ernest's room after Gloria left again. I laid the Otis documents on his tray table. This is who you've handed everything to, I said quietly. He read, face paling further. When he saw the amounts Dwight had stolen and Journey's role in Otis's ruin, he closed his eyes. I didn't know the extent, he admitted. Journey said it was just smart business. Gloria kept pushing, saying you were the threat. With Camden's help, I started assembling the probate packet that night in a quiet corner of the hospital lobby. I contacted a separate attorney I'd found through work contacts, someone unaffiliated with Dwight. We scheduled an emergency filing attaching the DHUC, the clause, activation-proof medical records showing Ernest's collapse, tied to eviction stress, and Camden's full evidence bundle. The lawyer explained Louisiana law. If I proved undue influence on Ernest and Gloria through Journey's financial pressure and the DNA lie, the court could void the transfer and enforce Grandma's trust immediately. We included Gloria's recorded admissions from our kitchen confrontation and Otis's affidavit as pattern evidence. Ernest signed an affidavit from his bed the next morning stating he'd acted under duress and manipulation, believing the false paternity claim. It was the strongest piece, his own words admitting the eviction was wrongful. The lawyer filed electronically that afternoon, requesting an expedited hearing due to ongoing property damage. Camden added one final document, a lien notice from the parish for unpaid taxes Journey had dodged, putting the house at immediate risk. Everything was ready. The manipulation was documented, the fraud exposed, the medical coercion clear. Ernest drifted in and out, exhausted but relieved to unburden himself. I gathered the folders, knowing the next step would happen in court. In court, a month later, I walked into the probate courtroom in downtown New Orleans carrying a single thick envelope. The room was small, just a long table, the judge at the front, and a handful of clerks. Gloria sat rigid beside Ernest, who looked pale in a wheelchair. Spencer fidgeted next to Journey, who kept smoothing her skirt and glaring at me like I was the intruder. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, called the case. My attorney laid out the petition: first, wrongful eviction, breach of fiduciary duty, and activation of Grandma's protective trust. When it was my turn, I walked forward and placed the envelope on the bench. Your Honor, I said, this is the original irrevocable trust and DHUC of Hazel Ruiz filed 20 years ago in this parish. It grants me 70% ownership with a no contest clause that triggers upon unjust removal and subsequent mismanagement. The judge opened it, scanning the pages. My attorney called Camden as witness. He testified calmly, presenting bank records of Dwight Craig's transfers auction receipts for the antiques tax discrepancies and Otis Love's affidavit. Then came Ernest's signed statement from the hospital bed admitting he'd acted under undue influence from Gloria and Journey, including the false paternity claim they'd used for years. The judge raised an eyebrow at that one. Gloria tried to interrupt, claiming coercion, but the judge silenced her. Journey's lawyer, Dwight himself, conflict of interest noted, fumbled through objections. He argued the eviction was a family decision, but when the judge asked for proof of my consent, he had nothing. The tax liens and insurance lapses were entered next, concrete evidence of harm. After 40 minutes, the judge ruled from the bench. The trust is valid. The eviction violated its terms. Ownership reverts immediately to Amaya Ruiz. All subsequent transfers are void. It was over. Journey, Gloria, Ernest, and Spencer lost every claim to the house. The judge ordered it sold at public auction within 60 days to settle outstanding liens and reimburse the trust. Dwight was reported to the bar for ethics violations that same afternoon. 1 month after the ruling, the auction happened. The historic house sold for far less than it was worth because of the damage and liens, but my share cleared enough to start fresh. I cut all ties, no calls, no visits, no explanations. Ernest and Gloria filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They lost the few assets they had left and now rent a 1-bedroom apartment in Metairie, scraping by on Social Security. Spencer and Journey divorced 6 weeks later. The scandal tanked her boutique creditors circled, and she walked away with nothing but debt. Spencer moved into a studio downtown working odd jobs. I never looked back. The money from the sale let me buy a small place uptown, quiet and mine alone. Justice in America isn't always pretty, but when a trust is ironclad and the lies collapse under their own weight, the law does the rest. Betrayal has consequences. Real ones. Thank you for watching this family revenge story. If it hit home, smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? See you in the next one.